Hey there, come closer to the fire, because tonight we are standing on a dark hillside in central Italy, long before Rome learned to call itself eternal. And beneath our feet there are painted rooms full of banquets, dancers, sea creatures, gold, perfume jars, and the quiet bones of a civilization that Rome almost taught the world to forget. The olive trees move a little in the night wind. The valleys below are dark and soft. Somewhere, far away, water is finding its way through stone and roots toward the sea. The same patient water that moved before emperors, before senators, before marble forums, before the name Rome became heavy enough to cover almost everything around it. If you only knew Italy from later maps, you might imagine this land waiting for Rome, empty and obedient, like a stage before the actors arrive. But it was not empty. It was already alive. A people lived in these hills and coastal plains, building cities, carving tombs into volcanic rock, trading across the Mediterranean, reading omens in lightning and birds, shaping bronze mirrors, wearing gold so delicate that even modern hands would hesitate to breathe near it. They had temples, kings, councils, harbors, artists, priests, and a language that we can see and sound out, yet still cannot fully hear. They were the Etruscans. And the darker truth is not that they vanished in one night of fire. That would almost be easier to understand. The darker truth is quieter. They were absorbed, renamed, borrowed from, corrected, mocked, admired, and slowly overwritten, until much of what they had been survived only in tombs, in Roman rituals, in strange inscriptions, and in the shape of letters that still linger like ghosts. If this kind of quiet history keeps you company, please like the video and subscribe. It helps this little candle stay lit for the next buried story. Now settle in. Let the room dim around you. Let the fire crackle softly. We are going underground tonight, but gently. Imagine the hillside again. The moon is thin. The grass is dry underfoot. A path moves between olive trees and low stones, and the air smells of earth, leaves, and old rain hidden inside the soil. Nothing above ground looks dramatic. There is no triumphal arch, no paved Roman road shining under torchlight, no legionary standard snapping in the wind. Only the slope, the roots, the dark outline of cypress, and the feeling that something is waiting beneath the silence. Then a tomb opens, not in a violent way, not with treasure hunters and shouting. Let it open slowly in the mind, as if a careful hand has cleared the earth from a stone doorway that has not felt air for centuries. Coolness rises first, a breath from the underworld. Dust shifts. A small flame enters, and the darkness inside becomes a room. The walls are painted. That is the part that stops you. Not bones first. Not death first. Color. A banquet stretches across the plaster. Men and women recline together, their faces turned toward cups and music. A dancer lifts one foot as if the next step is only a heartbeat away. A musician holds a double pipe near the mouth, forever about to play. Birds perch in painted branches, Dolphins and sea creatures move through borders of color. The dead are not surrounded by silence only. They are surrounded by life remembered so intensely that it still seems warm. I have always found that strange and moving. Some cultures bury the dead with fear, some with sternness. Here, at least in these elite tombs, the afterlife can look like a feast that never quite ends. It is beautiful, and because it is beautiful, it is also sadder. The cups never lift. The music never sounds. The dancers never land. Outside, Rome would one day become a machine of memory. It would write histories, carve inscriptions, build roads, stamp coins, and teach later ages how to remember it. The Etruscans left a different kind of memory, more fragile, more hidden. Their living houses mostly disappeared, but their houses of the dead remained under earth. Their long stories vanished, but their names stayed on tomb walls. Their language fell silent, but their letters waited. This is why their disappearance feels so haunting. They were not a small shadow before greatness. They were one of the great powers of early Italy. They influenced Rome before Rome became Rome. According to Roman tradition, Etruscan kings once ruled the city. Etruscan symbols of authority, the fasces, the curule chair, the purple-bordered robe, passed into Roman public life. Etruscan priests taught Romans to read signs from the gods. Etruscan engineers helped master water, dura, walls, and sacred space. Even the Roman alphabet walked a path shaped by Etruscan hands. And yet, ask the ordinary memory of history. And Rome stands in the sunlight while Etruria stands half underground. That is not an accident, exactly, but it is not simple either. Rome did not erase the Etruscans by burning every city and killing every voice. Some cities were conquered brutally. Some were absorbed through treaties. Some elites became Roman. Some families changed language because Latin became the path to law, autonomy, power, and survival. Old gods were translated. Old rituals were folded into Roman practice. Old stones were reused in new walls. A living culture became material for another culture to build with. That kind of erasure is slow. It does not always look like destruction while it is happening. A grandfather speaks Etruscan. A son speaks both Etruscan and Latin. A grandson learns Latin for public life and keeps only a few old words for home or ritual. A temple is not abandoned at once, but its dedication changes. A name is carved in a new form. A city keeps its hill, its springs, its tomb roads, but the voice inside the city changes. One day, the old language is no longer needed in court, then no longer needed in contracts, then no longer taught to children, then only priests and antiquarians know fragments. Then even they are gone. The tombs remain. Rome was very good at telling stories about itself. It had to be. An empire is built not only from armies and laws, but from memory. Rome told its own origins through shepherds, kings, refugees, war, virtù, disciplina, and destiny. When Etruscans appear in Roman stories, They often appear as useful figures in someone else's drama. Mysterious diviners, rich kings, dangerous neighbors, luxurious nobles, skilled craftsmen, foreign rulers who taught Rome something, then had to be thrown out so Roman freedom could be born. There is truth in some of that, perhaps. There is also convenience. A powerful younger city often needs its older teachers to become background. Before Rome covered the map, Italy was not neat. It was a patchwork of peoples and languages. The Latins lived around the Tiber, farming and fighting in the region that would give birth to Rome. The Umbrians held upland territories farther inland. The Samnites lived among the rugged Apennines to the south, stubborn and fierce enough to trouble Rome for generations. The Veneti occupied the northeast, facing routes into Central Europe. Greek cities shone along southern coasts and in Sicily, bringing temples, pottery, poetry, trade, and political forms from the wider Mediterranean. And in the middle, across Tuscany and nearby regions, the Etruscans rose. They did not live apart from the others. They traded with Greek colonies. They dealt with Phoenicians and Carthaginians. They influenced Latium. They sailed the Tyrrhenian Sea so actively that Greek writers named that sea after them. Their wine jars reached distant coasts. Their metals fed workshops. Greek pottery entered their tombs. Amber came from northern routes. Ivory and luxury goods came through eastern networks. This was not a sleepy land waiting for Roman order. It was noisy, wealthy, divided, ambitious, and deeply connected. If you were standing with me on that hillside before dawn, you would not hear any of that directly. You would hear leaves, perhaps an owl, perhaps the faint movement of an animal in dry grass. Yet under the soil, the evidence is dense. A chamber tomb, a painted wall, a bronze mirror with names scratched on its back, a gold earring made from hundreds of tiny beads fused with impossible care, a clay sarcophagus with a reclining couple, smiling in a way that feels almost too intimate for a museum. That smile is one of the things people remember about Etruscan art. The dead do not always look solemn. Sometimes they look as if they are still at table, still speaking. I'm still amused by some private joke the rest of history has lost. There is warmth there. Human warmth. The kind that resists being flattened into a footnote. But the tombs also remind us of the limit. We see what was buried. We see what elites wanted remembered. We see ceremonies, status, imported objects, family pride, and the afterlife as imagined by people wealthy enough to paint it. We do not hear the full voices of farmers, servants, sailors, craft workers, children, ordinary market women, the people whose hands carried water and clay and wood through Etruscan streets. Archaeology gives us clues, not resurrection. Still, clues are enough to begin. The Etruscans built cities with walls and streets. They shaped their landscape with drains and roads. They watched birds before acting, and lightning before deciding. They held councils in sacred places. They buried their dead in rooms carved like houses. They wrote, though we cannot fully read them. They were admired by Rome, feared by Rome, mocked by Rome, and used by Rome. They were not merely before Rome, they are inside Rome, like an older layer of paint under a later fresco. That is the thread we will follow. Not a clean fall, not a single catastrophe. A disappearance by conquest, borrowing, translation, and forgetting. A civilization pushed underground while its conqueror carried away pieces of it and called them Roman. The fire beside us lowers a little. The tomb flame is steady. The painted dancer still holds 1 foot above the floor, waiting for music that never comes. The hillside is quiet. Above the tomb, olive trees lean into the night and do not care which empire won. To understand how such a people could rise, and how Rome could later stand on top of their memory, we need to look at Italy before the Roman map hardened around it. Not one country, not one destiny. A broken and beautiful peninsula of mountains, valleys, ports, tribes, colony, trade winds, and old roads, where the Etruscans became something extraordinary before history learned how to bury them. Before Rome made Italy look inevitable, the peninsula was a place of many small worlds. It is tempting to begin with a map, because maps make history look obedient. A clean outline of Italy, the boot shape, the seas around it, Rome somewhere near the center, everything else waiting to be organized. But that is a later illusion. The Italy of the Iron Age was not a single thing. It was a mosaic, and the pieces did not yet know they would be forced into one pattern. The land itself encouraged division. The Apennine Mountains run down the peninsula like a long, uneven spine. They split regions, redirect weather, divide rivers, and create valleys that face different seas. A community on one side of a ridge might trade, marry, fight, pray, and speak differently from a community only a few days' walk away. Mountains do that. They do not make walls in the absolute sense, but they slow movement. They make pockets. They give each valley time to become itself. To the west lay the Tyrrhenian Sea, warm, wide, and open to the western Mediterranean. It invited ships toward Sardinia, Corsica, southern France, Spain, North Africa, and beyond. To the east lay the Adriatic, narrower, with its own currents and routes, pulling communities toward Illyria and the Balkans. In the north, the Po Valley spread flat and fertile, a world unlike much of the rest of Italy. In the south, Greek colonies lined coastal plains, bringing with them stone temples, wine-drinking customs, alphabetic writing, myth, and the sharp confidence of cities that already knew the wider sea. Between these regions lived many peoples. The Latins were one group among others, clustered around the lower Tiber and nearby hills. Their settlements were not yet the rulers of anything grand. Rome, in its earliest phases, was a local center growing in a useful place, not the center of fate. The Umbrians lived farther inland. The Samnites held difficult country in the Apennines, a landscape that helped form their stubborn independence. The Veneti occupied the northeastern corner, tied to routes into Central Europe. Along the south and Sicily, Greeks built cities such as Cumae, Syracuse, Sybaris, and others, each bringing pieces of the eastern Mediterranean into Italian soil. And then, in central Italy, especially in the region we now call Tuscany, with reach into Umbria and Campania at different times, there were the Etruscans. They were not isolated hill people staring suspiciously at the sea. They were entangled from the beginning in wider networks. Their towns looked inland and outward at the same time. Their fields and mines lay behind them, their harbors before them. Greek pottery reached their tombs. Phoenician and Carthaginian contacts moved through their ports. Amber traveled down from the north. Metals from Etruscan lands moved out across the sea. Wine, oil, ceramics, bronze, ivory, gold, and ideas crossed paths in their hands. This matters because Rome later taught so many people to imagine itself as the bringer of order. But before Rome dominated Italy, order already existed in many forms. Local order, sacred order, market order, maritime order. The Etruscans did not need Rome to teach them complexity. If anything, early Rome learned complexity from them. Where they came from is one of the old questions. Ancient writers argued about it, while Etruscan civilization was still close enough to touch. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century before the Common Era, told a story of migration from Lydia, in western Anatolia. According to him, famine struck the Lydians for many years. The king divided the people, and one group sailed west in search of a new home. They reached Italy and became the Etruscans. It is a vivid story, shaped like myth, with hunger, ships, exile, and founding. That does not make it false, but it does make it a story that needs careful hands. Imagine it for a moment. A hungry land under a hard sky. Grain stores failing. Families dividing what little remains. Lots drawn. Ships built or loaded. Half a people looking back at a shore they may never see again. The sea ahead is not empty, but it is uncertain. The story has the deep emotional truth of migration, even if the historical details cannot be taken simply as fact. Dionysius of Halicarnassus disagreed. Writing centuries later in Rome, he argued that the Etruscans were indigenous to Italy, not immigrants from Lydia, not foreigners who arrived by fleet, but a people rooted in the land. He pointed to differences in language, customs, and way of life. The Etruscans, he thought, had grown from Italian soil itself. There was also a northern theory, less powerful, but persistent, suggesting that the Etruscans came from beyond the Alps. It appears in some strands of ancient and later thought, though it never fully overtook the other views. So from antiquity onward, the Etruscans stood at the center of competing origin stories. Eastern migrants, native Italians, northern arrivals. Modern evidence has made the answer both clearer and less simple. Archaeology points strongly toward continuity with the Villanovan culture, which flourished in central Italy before the full rise of Etruscan civilization. Villanovan communities cremated their dead and placed ashes in biconical urns, often under small mounds. They worked metal, built settlements, and participated in exchange networks. Across the 10th, 9th, 8th, and 7th centuries before the Common Era. The record shows transformation rather than replacement. There is no neat layer where one people disappears and another arrives fully formed. No simple ash line. No sudden foreign package of pottery. Burial, house form, and language landing all at once. Instead, settlements grow. Wealth increases. Burials become richer and more elaborate. Cremation gives way in some contexts to chamber tombs and inhumation. Greek and Phoenician influence enters through trade and prestige goods. Local communities absorb, adopt, and become something new. That something is Etruscan. Genetics has joined the discussion more recently, and like many honest witnesses, it complicates the courtroom. Some studies suggest connections between Etruscan populations and people around the Eastern Mediterranean or Anatolia. That gives a faint echo to Herodotus. But the same evidence also shows strong continuity with earlier Italian populations, which supports the archaeological picture of local roots. The likely truth may not be either migration or native development, but both in different proportions. A small movement of people can matter without replacing everyone. A group of traders, artisans, families, or elites arriving from the East over generations could mix with Villanovan communities and help shape language, customs, or status symbols. Or Eastern genetic signals might reflect broader Mediterranean mobility rather than one dramatic migration. We cannot be perfectly certain. The past rarely hands us a signed confession. Honestly, I like the uncertainty here. It feels more human. Cultures do not usually walk onto the stage fully dressed from one direction. They form at crossroads. They borrow. They resist. They imitate and then change what they imitate. They marry strangers. They bury imported cups beside local ancestors. They speak old words with new objects in their hands. The Etruscans were almost certainly a people of mixture and place. Their roots reached into Villanovan Italy. Their branches touched Greece, Phoenicia, Carthage, the Alps, the Baltic routes, and the wider Mediterranean. Their cities rose in a landscape of volcanic hills, river valleys, mineral wealth, and sea roads. They were not only from somewhere, they became somewhere. That becoming took time. At first, imagine villages and small settlements on defensible hills, with huts, cremation urns, metalwork, and local chiefs. Smoke rises in the morning. Animals move beyond simple fences. A woman grinds grain. A smith tends heat. A child watches sparks from a furnace and is told to stand back. Beyond the settlement, the land drops toward fields, woods, and routes that lead eventually to the sea. Then, slowly, wealth thickens. More goods arrive from far away. A Greek cup appears in the hands of an elite family. A bronze object is copied in a local style. A burial becomes more elaborate than the one before it. A mound grows larger. The dead are given more objects, because the living are learning to speak status through burial. Houses change. Settlements expand. Lines of power harden around families whose names will later repeat in tomb inscriptions. By the 8th and 7th centuries before the Common Era, this world has become recognizably Etruscan. Cities rise, aristocracies form, temples appear, writing is adopted from Greek models and reshaped for Etruscan speech. The sea becomes not a boundary, but a road. The dead move into carved chambers that mirror houses of the living. Art becomes confident, strange, and vivid. The Etruscans did not form a single empire with one capital. That comes later in our tendency to simplify. Etruria was a constellation. Tarquini, Veii, Caere, Vulci, Clusium, Volterra, Papillonia, Perugia, Orvieto. Cities with their own territories, families, cults, rivalries, councils, and ambition. A person may have thought first of the city, then of the broader Etruscan world, much as people in Greek city-states did. This city-based structure made Etruria strong in some ways and vulnerable in others. Many centers could shine. Many ports could trade. Many aristocratic houses could compete in building, art, religion, and display. But when pressure came, unity was harder. A league of cities existed in some form, according to later Roman sources, often remembered as 12 peoples of Etruria. Yet how fixed or powerful that league was remains debated. The number 12 may have carried tradition and symbolism as much as strict administrative reality. Still, the idea of cities meeting matters. The Forum Voltumnae, a sacred meeting place whose exact location is still debated, was remembered as the place where Etruscan cities gathered. Imagine delegates traveling through morning mist, with attendants, offerings, animals, and guarded words. A sacred grove, a temple, smoke from sacrifice, games and feasting, priests reading signs, aristocrats speaking not only as politicians, but under the eyes of gods. This was not politics separate from religion. In Etruria, the two were braided tightly. Decisions about war, alliance, building, boundaries, and power could be surrounded by ritual. The gods were not decorative. They were consulted. Lightning mattered. Birds mattered. The liver of a sacrificed animal could become a map of divine will. To modern ears that may sound strange, but to them it was a way of making the uncertain world legible. The same need for order appeared in the land itself. Etruscan cities were planned, expanded, drained, and connected. Streets could be regular. Boundaries could be marked. Fields divided. Water controlled through channels and tunnels. In central Italy, where low areas could become marsh, drainage was power. To dry a field, to direct a stream, to make a valley usable, was not only practical, it was a public statement. This city can shape nature. This elite can command labor. This community can turn wet uncertainty into road, field, and forum. Rome would later become famous for such things. Roads, drains, order imposed on landscape. But some of those techniques and ideas had older Etruscan roots. Early Rome itself, with its swampy low ground between hills, likely learned much from neighbors who already understood how to persuade water to move where humans wanted it to go. So before Rome became the master, it watched, it borrowed, it learned. On our hillside, the night is almost gone now. The eastern sky is pale. The tomb below still holds its painted banquet, but above ground, Italy, before Rome begins to appear in layers. Mountains dividing peoples, coasts opening trade, Villanovan urns under mounds, Greek ships at harbors, Phoenician goods in sanctuaries, Etruscan cities rising on high ground, each one bright with its own pride. They were not waiting to disappear. They were becoming powerful, and from their cities, roads would run to fields, sanctuaries, tombs, and ports. Councils would gather. Priests would watch the sky. Drains would carry water through darkness. Ships would leave the Tyrrhenian coast heavy with metal, vine, oil, and ambition. The Etruscans had stepped fully into history, even if history would later try to speak over them. The Etruscans did not rise as one empire with one throne. That is important to remember, because later Rome makes us expect a center, one capital, one law, one voice speaking outward across roads and provinces. Etruria was different. It was not one giant shadow cast from a single palace. It was a constellation of cities, bright, proud, jealous, sacred, wealthy, and sometimes stubborn enough to weaken one another when unity was needed most. Tarquini, Veii, Caere, Volci, Closium, Volterra, Populonia, Perugia, Orvieto. Names scattered across central Italy like lamps on hilltops. Each city had its own walls, its own leading families, its own sanctuaries, its own dead resting outside the gates, its own rivalries and memories. A person living there may have thought first of the city, the streets, the fields, the family tomb, the local gods. The broader name, Etruscan, mattered. Surely, but it may have rested over local identity like a cloak, warm and impressive, but not the skin beneath. If you were standing with me at dawn outside one of these cities, perhaps Tarquini or Caere, you would see why identity clung so tightly to place. The city would rise on high ground, its outline dark against a pale sky. Below it, fields would slope away into mist. Roads would lead outward, some toward farms, some toward shrines, some toward necropolises, some toward the coast where ships waited. Smoke would begin to lift from houses. A dog would bark. A woman would pour water into a clay vessel. A man would carry tools toward a workshop. The walls would not feel like decoration. They would feel like the edge of a world. Inside those walls, power belonged to families as much as offices. Etruscan society was strongly aristocratic. The great lineages held land, wealth, clients, tombs, and memory. Their names repeated across generations on inscriptions and grave goods. Their houses would have stored bronze, cloth, imported cups, oil, wine, weapons, and the quiet authority of ancestors. They supplied magistrates, priests, commanders, and perhaps kings in the earlier centuries. They paid for public works. They dedicated temples. They filled their tombs with objects that said, "Remember us. We were important while breath still moved in us." Roman writers later loved the idea of Etruscan kings. A ruler in fine clothing, a purple-bordered robe, an ivory chair, attendants carrying rods and axes before him. The image is powerful, and some of it may preserve a real memory of Etruscan forms of authority. In many early cities, strong leaders probably held executive power. Yet even a king, if king is the right word, did not float alone above society. Behind him stood families, councils, priests, and old obligations. Power was not only a crown, it was a web. Over time, some cities seem to have shifted toward magistracies and councils. Offices with titles appear in inscriptions, though not always clearly understood. We know enough to sense structure, but not enough to sit in the meeting room and hear the arguments. That is one of the frustrations of Etruscan history. We see the chair, the tomb, the title, the road, the temple. We do not hear the speech that decided what would happen next. Still, the city speaks in stone and layout. Etruscan settlements were not simply accidental clusters of huts growing wherever the ground was convenient. Many show planning, expansion, streets arranged with intention, spaces set aside for public life, houses grouped in ways that suggest order rather than chance. Streets could cross in regular patterns. City blocks could be shaped deliberately. Gates faced roads that tied the city to fields, sanctuaries, and neighboring territories. Think of a surveyor in morning light. He stands with a cord, a rod, perhaps a companion marking a line. The earth is uneven. Dust clings to sandals. The air smells of grass and worked soil. A road is not yet a road, only a decision stretched across the land. Men move stones. Others clear brush. A ditch is cut. A boundary is marked. The shape of the city begins as thought, then becomes labor, then becomes habit, then becomes memory. Outside the walls, land division mattered too. Fields had edges. Roads had directions. Rural sanctuaries stood at crossings and borders, watching over territory in both practical and sacred ways. Boundary stones did not simply say, "This belongs to one person and not another." They also carried the weight of order. To mark a boundary was to make the landscape readable. It turned hills and fields into a system that people and gods could recognize. Water was one of the great tests of that system. Central Italy is not only picturesque hills and silver olive leaves. It is also valleys, springs, gullies, low, wet ground, and places where water gathers whether humans approve or not. The Etruscans learned to persuade water. They cut channels. They made drains. They diverted streams. They opened tunnels through rock. At Veii and other sites, Archaeologists have found waterworks that show skill, planning, and a willingness to reshape the land. Picture workers in a narrow cutting, the air cool and mineral around them. A lamp flickers. Tools strike stone, not quickly, never quickly, but again and again. Dust gathers on arms. Water seeps along the floor and is guided away. A foreman listens, perhaps to the hollow sound of the rock. Above them, fields wait to be dried. Streets wait to become passable. A city waits for the invisible labor beneath it to make life easier above. There is something almost soothing about drainage when you think of it slowly. Water does not vanish. It is given a path. The marshy place becomes firm. The road holds. The foundation stays. The field can be planted. A city that controls water feels as if it has negotiated with uncertainty and won a small agreement. Rome would later become famous for drains and public works. The great drain of the Roman Forum, the Cloaca Maxima, was linked in Roman tradition to the old kings, and those kings were wrapped in Etruscan memory. Whether every detail is true or not, the larger point is hard to miss. Rome learned in a world where Etruscan engineers and sacred planners already knew how to turn wet ground into civic space. Yet for the Etruscans, civic order was never only practical. A city was not merely a place where people slept, traded, argued, and stored grain. It was a sacred arrangement. Temples did not sit in the background like private chapels. They stood on raised podiums, facing public spaces, aligned in ways that may have carried ritual meaning. Their terracotta roofs were bright ones, with gods, beasts, and painted forms catching the sun. The front of an Etruscan temple mattered deeply. It addressed the city like a face. Imagine a temple at morning. The steps still cool. The air sharp. A priest moves slowly, careful with gesture. Smoke rises from an offering. People gather in the open space below. A magistrate waits. A decision must be made, perhaps about war, alliance, a road, a boundary, a dedication. But before the human decision comes the divine sign. Birds are watched. Lightning is remembered. The entrails of a sacrificed animal may be examined. To modern ears, this can sound distant, almost strange, beyond reach. But inside their world, it was not superstition tossed over politics. It was politics happening inside the structure of sacred meaning. The gods were part of the city. A decision without signs could feel incomplete, perhaps even dangerous. Later, Romans spoke of the Etruscan discipline, a body of sacred knowledge about omens, lightning, birds, and entrail. We mostly know it through Roman filters, so we must be careful. But the outline is clear enough. The Etruscans were famous for reading the will of the gods. They believed the world was full of messages. If one knew how to divide, observa, and interpret it, that belief may have shaped civic life from the ground upward. There was also a broader assembly of cities, at least in memory, and probably in practice. Roman sources speak of 12 peoples of Etruria, a league of cities. The number 12 may have been symbolic, traditional, or sometimes practical. Scholars are cautious. It may not have been one fixed league with the same 12 members forever. There may have been different leagues at different times. The evidence is not tidy, and tidy answers are often suspicious in ancient history. Still, some kind of gathering existed. The Fanum Voltumnae, a sacred sanctuary whose exact location remains debated, was remembered as a meeting place for Etruscan cities. Some place it near modern Orvieto. Others look elsewhere in inland Etruria. Wherever it was, imagine the scene not as a parliament in our modern sense, but as a sacred convergence. Delegates arrive by road. Hooves strike earth. Wheels creak. Servants carry bundles. Offerings, food, perhaps ritual objects wrapped in cloth. Aristocrats greet one another with formal warmth and private calculation. Priests prepare sacrifices. Smoke lifts into the trees. Games may be held. Feasts follow. News moves quietly from one city to another. Who has quarreled with whom? Which border is uncertain? Which rival is growing dangerous? Whether Rome, still younger and rougher, should be watched more closely. The grove or sanctuary would have been more than a meeting point. It was a place where many separate cities could remember, for a little while, that they belonged to a larger sacred world. Unity did not erase rivalry. It gave rivalry a ritual frame. That may have been one of Etruria's strengths, and perhaps one of its weaknesses. Because many centers can glitter, but many centers can also hesitate. When a threat comes slowly, one city may hope it passes elsewhere. Another may bargain. Another may fight. Another may preserve its own advantage. A centralized empire can move with terrible speed when it chooses. A constellation must agree first, and agreement can be slower than danger. But danger is still distant in this moment. For now, the cities are alive. Their markets open. Their councils meet. Their drains carry water. Their artisans shape clay and bronze. Their families carve tombs into rock outside the walls, making houses for the dead that mirror houses of the living. Their priests stand under the sky and try to understand the divine pattern above human noise. If you walked through one of these cities at dusk, you might hear the sound of sandals on stone, a potter turning clay, a metalworker hammering bronze, a child being called indoors, a cart creaking through a gate. You might smell bread, smoke, oil, wet earth near a drain, animals in a courtyard, incense near a shrine. You might pass a magistrate with attendants and wonder how much of his authority came from law, how much from family, how much from the gods, and how much from everyone agreeing to pretend those things could be separated. They could not be separated. That is what makes Etruscan civic life feel so different from the modern city. The street, the temple, the council, the tomb road, the drainage tunnel, the boundary stone, the festival procession, the family banquet, all were threads in one cloth. To build was to order. To order was to consult the gods. To consult the gods was to accept that human life occupied a pattern larger than itself. The fire beside us makes a low sound. In the imagined city, evening gathers. The last light touches terracotta figures on a temple roof. Water moves unseen through channels cut into rock. Far outside the walls, the necropolis darkens, and painted banqueters wait in rooms under earth. Beyond the western roads, the air begins to smell faintly of salt. That is where the next part of their power waited. Not only in hills and walls, not only in councils and sacred groves. The Etruscans faced the Tyrrhenian Sea, and the sea did not stand as a boundary. It was a road. Their ships carried metal, wine, oil, pottery, gold, perfumi, image, stories, and danger. From their inland cities and sacred streets, their world opened outward, toward harbors where foreign voices mixed with gull cries and the water shone dark under the evening wind. Follow the road west from the hill cities, and the air begins to change. At first there are fields, vineyards, orchards, low stone boundaries, and the slow rhythm of inland life. Dust lifts around sandals. Insects move in the grass. A cartwheel creaks over a rut. Then the land lowers. The wind grows softer and heavier. Somewhere ahead, before the eye sees it, the nose knows. Salt, pitch, vetrope, fish, smoke from harbor fires. The Tyrrhenian Sea is near. The Greeks called that water the Sea of the Tyrrhenoi, their name for the Etruscans. That alone tells us something. A sea does not take a people's name because they sit quietly in the hills. The Etruscans were everywhere on those waters, trading, sailing, negotiating, competing, sometimes raiding, sometimes being called pirates by rivals who may have been doing nearly the same thing under a more respectable name. The coastline was one of their great doors. Caer had its port at Pyrgi. Tarquinia had access to Gravisca. Populonia looked toward the rich metal world of Elba and the coast. Other harbors tied inland cities to the restless Mediterranean. Ships came and went, their hulls black with pitch, their sails furled or swelling, their bellies filled with objects that had already crossed more landscapes than most people would ever see. Imagine standing on an Etruscan quay at dusk. The planks underfoot are damp. Ropes lie coiled like sleeping snakes. Dock workers shout in more than one language. A sailor from a Greek city argues with a broker who knows just enough Greek to make the bargain warmer and just enough Etruscan to keep his own profit safe. A Phoenician trader watches quietly beside amphorae sealed with clay. A local official, perhaps connected to a sanctuary, notes what has arrived and what is owed. Gulls cry overhead, sounding annoyed with all human commerce, as gulls still do. Cargo comes first in heavy forms. Metals were among Etrurius' great strengths. Iron from Elba and Populonia, copper and lead from inland hills, silver and other ores moving through networks that tied mines, smelters, roads, harbors, and foreign buyers into one chain. Ore is not glamorous when it first appears. It is heavy, dark, stubborn, dirty. Men sweat under it. Baskets strain. Ships sink lower in the water when it is loaded. Yet from that weight came tools, weapons, vessels, mirrors, fittings, ornaments, and wealth. A lump of ore in a basket can become a bronze mirror in a noble house. It can become a cauldron in a banquet hall. It can become a decorative fitting on a chariot, a nail in a temple roof, a blade, a clasp, a votive offering, a grave good. The transformation required fire, shill, and trade. The Etruscans had all three. In return for metal, foreign ships brought things that changed taste and status. Greek pottery, olive oil, perfumed unguents, fine cloth, glass, ivory, amber, painted cups, luxury goods that could travel from the eastern Mediterranean through many hands before resting in an Etruscan tomb. Every object carried a little weather from elsewhere. Think of a Greek crater, a large bowl for mixing wine. It begins in a workshop across the sea. A potter shapes the clay. A painter adds figures, perhaps gods, warriors, horses, monsters, dancers. It is fired, bought, packed with care, carried to a harbor, loaded onto a ship, rocked for days across the water, unloaded in an Etruscan port, carried inland, displayed in a house, used at a banquet, admired by guests, then finally placed in a tomb beside the dead. Centuries later, modern people call it Greek art, and rightly so in one sense. But many of the most famous Greek vases survived because Etruscans bought them, loved them, used them, and buried them. Our memory of Greek pottery is partly preserved through Etruscan desire. History is funny that way. One culture becomes the museum of another without meaning to. The Etruscans did not merely receive foreign objects like passive collectors. They transformed what they touched. A Greek image might enter Etruria and reappear with Etruscan names. A mythic hero might be engraved on the back of a bronze mirror, but the letters around him are Etruscan. A goddess from Phoenician religion might meet a local goddess at a harbor sanctuary and become part of a shared, sacred language. A drinking custom may come from Greek symposium culture, but in Etruscan banquets, women recline with men in a way that surprised or unsettled Greek and Roman observers. That is how cultures really move. Not by copying cleanly, by translation, by misunderstanding, by admiration, by pride, by the small decision to take something foreign and make it local. Bronze mirrors show this beautifully. Hold one in your imagination. Its polished face would once have caught light, not as clearly as modern glass, but warmly, with a bronze glow. On the back, an artist engraves figures with delicate lines. Maybe a scene from Greek myth. Maybe a local story wearing Greek clothing. Maybe divine names written in Etruscan letters. The object belongs to grooming, luxury, identity, and art at once. It is personal enough to be held near the face, prestigious enough to be buried with the dead. Gold jewelry tells another story of patience. Etruscan goldsmiths became famous for granulation, the arranging of tiny beads of gold into patterns so fine that even now they seem almost impossible. Imagine a craftsman sitting close to a small flame, breath held, fingers steady, placing bead after bead in a design smaller than a fingernail. A rosette appears, a border, a chain, a bundle. The gold is soft, but the skill is severe. One careless movement and the pattern fails. Luxury, at that scale, is not laziness. It is discipline in miniature. Amber came from far north, from Baltic routes, warm, colored, and strange, like sunlight hardened into a charm. Ivory came through eastern networks. Glass and faience carried the colors of distant workshops. Perfume jars arrived with scented oils, small luxuries that turned the body itself into a display of wealth. A noble Etruscan household could become a quiet gathering of distant places. Wine and oil moved too. Greek amphorae arrived first, filled with goods that carried prestige and pleasure. But the Etruscans adopted and adapted viticulture and olive cultivation, then sent out their own products. Etruscan amphorae have been found in places far from Etruria, in southern France, Corsica, Sardinia, Spain, and beyond. Each jar is a little clay witness to a sea road. A ship leaves the coast, heavy with wine or oil. It stops at one port, then another. Some jars are emptied in a warehouse. Some travel inland. Some break. Some are buried. Some wait for archaeologists under soil and water. Ports were not only commercial spaces. They were sacred spaces, too. Pyrgi, the port of care, gives us one of the most powerful images of this overlap. There, in a sanctuary by the sea, gold tablets were found, inscribed in Etruscan and Phoenician. They record a dedication by a local ruler, the Fari Velianas, to a goddess connected with the Phoenician Astarte and with local divine forms. The tablets do not solve the Etruscan language, but they give rare bilingual light. More than that, they show a harbor where trade, politics, and religion met on the same sacred ground. Picture the sanctuary at Pyrgi at sunset. The sea is close enough to hear. The air smells of salt and burnt offerings. Thin gold sheets catch the last light. A ruler dedicates a temple, but the goddess has more than one name, depending on who is speaking. Etruscan words and Phoenician words lie beside each other. Not identical, but related through the act of devotion. Ships creak in the harbor. A priest watches smoke rise. Merchants count profit. The divine and the commercial stand side by side, as if that were the most natural thing in the world. Because for them, it was. The sea made the Etruscans rich, but it also made them feared. Greek sources often describe Tyrrhenians with suspicion. Sometimes traders, sometimes pirates, sometimes both. In the ancient Mediterranean, the line between merchant, raider, private captain, customs collector, and pirate could be thin enough to disappear in fog. A ship might trade peacefully one season and attack a rival route the next. A city that controlled a stretch of coast might demand payment from passing vessels. Those who paid called it duty. Those who hated paying called it theft. We should not imagine Etruscan sailors as innocent only because later writers were biased. Some surely raided. Some surely seized cargo when opportunity smiled and no witness could stop them. But we should also be careful. Rival cultures often call one another pirates when they mean competitors. Greek cities, Phoenician traders, Carthaginian powers, and Etruscan ports all wanted profit, access, and influence. The sea was a road, but it was also a contest. Out on the water, danger had no single language. A ship leaving Populonia with metal might face weather, reefs, hostile crews, uncertain treaties, and the ordinary accidents of wood and sail. Sailors watched clouds and birds. They tied offerings to the gods before departure. They knew that a profitable cargo could become a coffin if wind turned badly. They knew that harbors were places of gossip and intelligence as much as trade. Who had quarreled? Which route was unsafe? Which Greek city was angry? Which Carthaginian captain was generous only when watched closely? At night, in a harbor, the ships would knock gently against moorings. Lamps would burn near warehouses. Men would sleep near cargo because cargo was wealth, and wealth had legs when guards were lazy. Somewhere, a foreign song might drift through the dark. Somewhere else, a priest would close a sanctuary gate. The sea would keep breathing against stone. All of this wealth flowed inland. The objects that came through ports did not stay by the shore. They traveled roads toward hill cities. A bronze vessel would be placed in an aristocratic hall. A Greek cup would sit beside local pottery. A string of amber would rest against skin at a feast. A gold ornament would be worn, admired, repaired, inherited, then buried. A painted vase would move from banquet to tomb, from living display to afterlife possession. This is why Etruscan tombs feel so cosmopolitan. They are not only local family chambers, they are warehouses of connection. A grave might contain objects from Greece, Phoenician networks, northern amber roots, local workshops, and Etruscan metalworkers all in one room. The dead lay inside a web of trade. If you follow one object slowly enough, the whole world opens. A cup in a tomb is not just a cup. It is clay from one land, painted by one hand, bought by another, shipped by a crew, bargained over in a port, carried inland by road, lifted at a feast, placed beside a body, sealed under earth, forgotten, found, catalogued, placed behind glass. So many hands, so many intentions, so much silence around one object that still holds its shape. The Etruscans lived at the center of these movements. They were not a preface. They were actors in the deep Mediterranean story, shaping and being shaped by every ship that entered their harbors. And yet the sea, like all roads, carried change as well as wealth. Foreign ideas entered. Foreign rivalries entered. Foreign styles altered local taste. Trade built aristocratic power, but it also made that power dependent on routes that could shift. Greek naval victories, Carthaginian competition, Celtic pressure inland, and Roman ambition nearby would one day tighten around Etruria from different directions. The same openness that enriched them also exposed them. For now, Though, stand one last time at the harbor. The sun has gone down. The water is dark purple. A ship is being loaded under torchlight. Men carry amphorae carefully, because clay breaks and profit leaks away with one careless fall. A bronze mirror wrapped in cloth waits in a crate. A goldsmith closes his workshop inland, perhaps unaware that an object he made will travel farther after death than he ever did in life. A Greek trader laughs too loudly. An Etruscan broker smiles without giving away his price. A priest murmurs near the sanctuary, asking the gods for safe passage. The Tyrrhenian wind moves through the ropes. Behind the harbor, roads climb back toward the cities. Beyond the cities, necropolises wait under earth. And into those tombs, many of these objects will one day go, carried from the noise of trade into sealed rooms of painted silence, where dancers, banqueters, winged guardians, and the dead will keep their long watch together. The road leaves the harbor and climbs inland again. Behind you, the Tyrrhenian sea keeps breathing against the stones. The ropes creak. The merchants argue. The gulls complain as if commerce itself has offended them. But the objects have begun their quieter journey. A Greek cup wrapped in cloth. A bronze mirror carried in a wooden box. A little jar of perfume sealed carefully against the air. Amber beads warm as captured sunlight. Gold jewelry so delicate that even a careless breath in the workshop might have felt dangerous. They move up the roads toward the cities, past vineyards and fields, past low boundary stones, past shrines where travelers pause to leave a small offering. The carts move slowly, because roads are never as smooth as the people who build them would like to imagine. Wheels strike ruts. Mules lower their heads. Dust rises and settles on cloth, on leather, on the hands of men walking beside the load. Somewhere beyond the next ridge, the city waits, and beyond the city, outside the walls, another city waits in silence. The city of the dead. Etruscan necropolises are often described that way. And the phrase is not only poetic. At Servitor, Tarquinia, Orvieto, and other places, tombs stretch across the land in rows and clusters, laid out with a strange familiarity. Paths run between them like streets. Low mounds rise like houses with roofs of earth. Rock-cut chambers open along lanes. Family tombs gather the dead across generations, as if kinship itself had been given walls and doorways. If you were standing here with me at dusk, you might not feel fear first. You might feel recognition. That is the eerie thing. The necropolis does not always feel like a place made only for endings. It can feel like a town that has gone very quiet. The living city is behind us now. Its fides, voices, animals, workshops, markets, and arguments have softened with distance. Here, the air is still. Grass moves in the wind. A lizard slips between stones. The entrance of a tomb sits low in the earth, dark and cool. Someone once came here with grief. Yes, but also with tools, paint, food, music perhaps, ritual, and careful intention. The dead were not simply hidden away. They were housed. Step down slowly. The passage is narrow. Dust loosens beneath the foot. The temperature changes as soon as you enter. Warm evening becomes cool stone. The sound outside grows faint. A lamp flame bends, then steadies. At first the chamber is only shadow, a hollow space beneath earth. Then the walls begin to return. A roof carved to imitate wooden beams. A central chamber like the hall of a house. Side rooms, benches, platforms shaped like beds. The stone itself has been asked to pretend it is domestic. It remembers furniture. It remembers rafters. It remembers a world where people ate, slept, stored vessels, spoke with family, and leaned on doorframes while evening came down. Instead of mattresses, there are resting places for the dead. Instead of household clutter, there are grave goods set with care. Jars, bowls, cups, lamps, weapons, jewelry, spindles, mirrors, tools, small things for children. In some burials, so quiet that the heart almost lowers its voice when it notices them. The Etruscans left their clearest rooms underground. That is one of the strange gifts and sorrows of archaeology. Their houses of the living mostly vanished, eaten by time, rebuilt over, reused, dissolved into later towns and fields. But the tombs stayed sealed, covered by earth, protected by darkness. They preserved a curated version of life, not everyday life in full truth. Of course, the dead do not choose alone what follows them. Families choose. Status chooses. Ritual chooses. Memory chooses. But still, the tombs speak. Sometimes they speak in objects. A warrior may have a helmet, a weapon, a belt fitting, a sign of rank. A woman may have fibulae, necklaces, mirrors, ornaments, things used on the body and for the body. A child may have a small vessel, a miniature object. Something that makes the distance between ancient and modern grief almost disappear. Drinking sets appear again and again. Cups, mixing bowls, strainers, ladles, jars, the whole equipment of feasting. To us, these are artifacts. To them, perhaps, they were continuity. The dead would still need honor. The dead would still need a social world. Other objects traveled far before they came to rest here. A Greek vase from a workshop across the sea. Amber from northern routes. Ivory shaped by foreign hands. A scarab in Egyptian style. Bronze vessels with connections beyond Etruria. A tomb can look local at first, and then, one by one, each object opens a road. You hold the story of a cup, and the map widens. Clay dug in Greece, painted by an artisan, bought by a merchant, packed into a ship, carried over the sea, sold at a harbor, displayed at a feast in an Etruscan house, handed from servant to guest, washed, admired, perhaps cracked a little at the rim, then chosen for burial, placed in a chamber. sealed in darkness, found after centuries, and lifted again into light by hands speaking another language entirely. A cup does not remember in words, but it remembers by surviving. At Tarquinia, the tombs speak in color. Many of the paintings are faded now. Some were damaged almost as soon as modern air entered the sealed spaces. Pigments that had slept for ages woke and began to vanish. That feels almost cruel. But it is also how fragile beauty often is. It waits for centuries, then changes because someone has finally looked at it. In the painted tombs, the world does not always mourn. A banquet stretches along the wall. Men and women recline on couches, propped on elbows, turning toward one another with cups in hand. Servants move through the scene. Musicians lift pipes and lyres. Dancers step lightly, bodies curved in motion. Birds perch among branches. Sea creatures swim through borders. The dead are surrounded by an idealized life of music, food, company, movement, and honor. There is nothing stiff about these figures when the paintings are fresh in the mind. They seem to move. A hand lifts. A knee bends. A face turns toward conversation. The painter was not trying to show silence only. The painter was trying to keep celebration close to death. Honestly, that is one reason Etruscan tombs feel so haunting. They do not deny death. They answer it with a feast. Perhaps this reflects elite afterlife belief. Perhaps the wealthy imagined that the best parts of earthly life could continue beyond the grave. Dining, music, sport, family, public honor. Perhaps the painted banquet also recalled funeral rites held by the living, feasts at the tomb, meals shared in memory of the dead. We cannot be sure in every case, because the Etruscans did not leave us a clear explanation in their own voice. We have images, objects, repeated patterns, and later sources filtered through Roman minds. So we move carefully. In some scenes, the mood grows darker at the edges. Winged beings appear near doors or borders. Guardians stand where one world may meet another. Names known from later interpretation, Charun and Vanth, are linked with figures who seem connected to the journey after death. Charun can appear stern, sometimes carrying a hammer. Not quite the Greek ferryman, but shadowed by a similar border world in later imagination. Vanth is often winged, a guide perhaps, a presence near passage and fate. These figures remind us that the banquet is not the whole story. The afterlife was not only comfort, it had thresholds, guide, powers, unseen rules, doorways that could not be crossed casually. The painted joy of the tombs is real, but it sits beside something solemn. A dancer lifts her foot forever, and near another wall a winged figure waits. That balance feels deeply human. We want the dead to be safe. We place food, image, names, lamps, familiar objects. We make rooms that look like homes. Yet we also know that death is not simply another room. It is a passage where our knowledge stops. So we paint guardians. We place signs. We ask the unknown to be kind. The tombs also reveal social hierarchy. Some burials are modest. A few pots, a tool, a simple vessel, enough to mark the person, not enough to dazzle. Others are overwhelming, with imported vases, bronze stands, cauldrons, candelabra, gold, ivory, weapons, chariot fittings, and painted chambers. Wealth did not end at death. It traveled downward and remained visible in the dark. That can feel cold, but it is useful evidence. The dead show us the living structure of power. Elite families use tombs to display lineage, taste, foreign connections, and authority. A chamber tomb was not only a resting place. It was a statement carved into earth. It said, "Our family belongs here. Our name continues. Our ancestors are present. Our wealth reaches across seas. Our dead are not forgotten. Names help when we can read them. An inscription may mark a person, a family relationship, a title. A name painted or carved beside a figure gives the dead a small anchor against disappearance. Yet even names can be frustrating. We can often sound them. We can recognize family patterns. We can say, "This is a son of that man. This is a woman of that family. This title belongs to an office or status," but the voice behind the name is still quiet. We do not know the tone of the person. The favorite food. The private temper. The joke told too often. The fear kept hidden. A tomb gives intimacy and distance at once. Walk deeper into another chamber. This one is painted with athletes. A runner leans forward. A wrestler grips another body. A horse races in profile, legs extended, chariot wheels turning forever. Games may have been part of funerary ceremonies, public displays of honor for the dead. They also show a world that valued spectacle, competition, strength, and aristocratic display. The body mattered. Movement mattered. The dead were remembered not only through stillness, but through action. In another tomb, hunting appears. Dogs stretch forward. Birds lift from reeds. A figure raises a weapon. The scene brings outdoor life into the enclosed room. In others, patterns on the walls imitate fabric. Tents, awnings, gardens, as if the tomb refuses to accept that it is only underground. You begin to feel the Etruscan imagination working against darkness. The chamber is under earth, so the painter gives it open air. The dead are still, so the walls give them dancers. The voice is gone, so musicians lift their instruments. The body has ended, so the feast continues. It is not denial. It is an offering of continuity. And because the tombs were sealed, they became accidental archives. Archaeologists can trace changes across centuries. Early cremation urns, shaped like huts, point back toward older forms of household and identity. Later, chamber tombs show increasing wealth, international contact, and changing social rituals. Imported goods cluster in certain places and periods, revealing trade connections. New underworld figures grow more prominent over time, suggesting shifts in belief or artistic fashion. Grave goods rise and fall with family power. A single tomb is a whisper. Many tombs together become a low chorus. Still, the chorus has missing words. We do not know the songs sung outside the tomb before sealing. We do not know how mourners touched the doorway before leaving. We do not know whether children were frightened of the painted winged beings, or comforted by them because adults had told the stories properly. We do not know what a widow thought when the last lamp was taken out. We do not know if anyone laughed softly at a memory during the funeral meal and felt guilty for it, as people do. That is the ache of studying a vanished people. The objects remain. The human weather around them is harder to recover. Yet the tombs do not feel empty. They feel paused. A cup raised but never drained. A lyre held but never heard. A painted dancer forever in balance. A couple reclining together, faces turned outward, as if they have just noticed us entering their room far too late. The dust softens everything. The air is cool. The living stand there with electric lights or careful lamps, and the dead remain hosts in their underground houses. In museums, the effect changes but does not vanish. A sarcophagus behind glass can still look back. A painted slab can still carry motion. A necklace laid on velvet can still imply skin, warmth, rank, and a vanished hand lifting it to the throat. The museum hush becomes another kind of tomb silence, brighter, labeled safer, but still full of absence. This is where the Etruscans are most alive to us, and that is the sorrow. They survive so vividly because they cared for death so elaborately. Their laughter, art, luxury, family pride, and afterlife hopes reached us through burial. Their living streets are harder to hear. Their dead rooms speak. As the lamp in the tomb lowers, look once more at the painted wall. The banquet continues. The musician does not tire. The servant never spills the wine. The winged figure waits at the boundary, patient as night. Above the tomb, olive roots drink from the soil. Far away, Rome has not yet risen, or has risen only as a small neighbor learning from older powers. The Etruscans are still themselves here. Not a Roman memory, not a stereotype, not a footnote. A people who made houses for the dead because they believed the dead required beauty, order, status, and passage. A people who sent cups, mirrors, gold, weapons, toys, and painted music into the earth. And from those painted walls, the gaze lifts upward, because the same people who furnished the underworld also watched the sky with intense care. They looked at birds, lightning, stars, sacred boundaries, and the hidden marks inside sacrificed animals. They believed the universe was speaking, not loudly, not always kindly, but constantly. To follow them now, we leave the tomb chamber quietly and step back into the night air, where the heavens above Etruria are divided by invisible lines, and every sign might be a message from the gods. Outside the tomb, the sky feels larger. After the painted rooms, underground, After the banquets and dancers and winged figures, the open air seems almost too wide. The night above Etruria is dark, but not empty. Stars gather over the hills. A bird moves somewhere among the trees. Far off, perhaps beyond a ridge, lightning flickers without sound. To us, these may be natural things. Weather, movement, animal life. To the Etruscans, they could also be signs. The world was not silent to them. At least, that is how later Romans remembered Etruscan religion. We must say this carefully. Much of what we know comes through Roman writers, Roman priests, Roman antiquarians, and later summaries of traditions Rome had already borrowed and reshaped. The original Etruscan ritual books, if they existed in durable form, have not survived for us in a clear voice. We are listening through a wall, but even through that wall, something powerful can be heard. The Romans spoke of the Etruscan discipline, not discipline in the sense of punishment or self-control, but a sacred body of knowledge, a system for reading messages from the gods, a science of signs. If we use the word science gently, in an omniscient way, it concerned lightning, birds, sacred boundaries, prodigies, and the entrails of sacrificed animals. It assumed that the universe had structure. It assumed that divine intention could be interpreted. It assumed that human beings were not wandering in a mute world. Imagine a priest before dawn. He stands on a high place outside the city. The air is cool. His robe moves slightly in the wind. Below him, roofs and streets are still dim. Beyond the walls, fields lie under mist. He raises his gaze, not in vague wonder, but with trained attention. The sky is not merely overhead. It is divided. Certain regions belong to certain divine powers. A bird crossing one part of the sky may mean one thing. Lightning appearing in another direction may mean something else. Space itself has been made readable. This idea of divided sacred space was later described through the word templum. Not temple as a building, but a sacred area marked out for observation, a portion of sky or earth cut from ordinary space and made meaningful. A ritual specialist could define this space, orient himself, and watch. East, west, left, right, front, back. These were not casual directions. They carried weight. The world became a grid of power. That may sound dry until you imagine living inside it. A city was not placed randomly. A temple was not just built wherever the land was convenient. A boundary was not merely legal. A lightning strike was not only flame and noise. Everything might correspond to a divine order above or beneath the visible world. Human action needed alignment. Before war, before founding, before building, before major public decisions, signs could be sought. If the gods were favorable, action could move forward. If not, hesitation itself became wisdom. One branch of this sacred knowledge was haruspicy, the reading of entrails, especially the liver. The Latin word haruspex means something like entrail watcher. The image can sound harsh to modern ears, but let us approach it softly, as an ancient act of interpretation rather than shock. In ritual, an animal was sacrificed. The liver was lifted and examined. Its shape, color, marks, swellings, irregularities, all could carry meaning. To us, it might seem like flesh only. To the trained specialist, it was a map. Not a map of roads, but of divine zones. The body of the animal became a little cosmos, a place where the gods could write briefly in matter. The most famous object that helps us understand this is the bronze liver of Piacenza. Say it slowly in the mind. A bronze liver. It is a small model found in northern Italy, covered with inscriptions. Its surface is divided into sections, each connected with divine names. Scholars still debate details of how it was used, but the basic image is unforgettable. A liver as a diagram of heaven. A hand-held cosmos. A teaching tool, perhaps, or a ritual model. Cold metal shaped like an organ of omen. Picture it resting in the palm. Bronze, cool against skin. Lines cut into the surface. Names of gods arranged in small territories. A student priest bending close, learning where each divine power belongs. A teacher pointing with a finger. Not there. Here. Remember the boundary. Remember which sign belongs to which god. Remember that an error in reading can lead a city wrongly. There is something both reassuring and unsettling here. Reassuring, because the world is ordered. The gods send signs. The trained can read them. Disasters are not meaningless. Decisions need not be made blind. Unsettling, because a world full of signs is never fully restful. A strange birth, a sudden storm, a bird flying the wrong way, lightning in a forbidden quarter, all might demand attention. The universe is not quiet background. It is always capable of interrupting. Rome took this seriously. Even after Rome conquered Etruscan cities and absorbed their elites, it continued to call on Etruscan specialists. Haruspices were consulted when prodigies occurred. A temple struck by lightning, a statue falling, an unusual animal birth. Strange signs that troubled public confidence. The Senate might ask experts trained in Etruscan methods to interpret what the gods were saying and what rituals were needed in response. This is one of the great ironies. Rome helped silence the Etruscan language, but preserved Etruscan sacred techniques because they were useful. Rome could absorb a people and still ask that people's old specialists to explain the anger of heaven. Augury also carried Etruscan influence, though Rome made it deeply its own. Watching birds was not a casual glance upward. It required ritual space, direction, and knowledge. A bird entering one portion of the sky could differ in meaning from a bird leaving another. The call, the flight, the number, the timing, all mattered. The sky became a text in motion. If you were standing beside such a priest, you might feel the long silence before the sign. The city behind you waits. A magistrate wants an answer. Soldiers want permission to move. Builders want to begin a foundation. The priest watches. A bird crosses the pale morning. For a moment, All politics rests on wings. The Etruscan discipline also included lightning. Later, Roman sources describe elaborate classifications where the direction, color, timing, and target of lightning could indicate which deity had acted and what response was required. Some gods could send lightning of one kind, others another. Some strikes could be accepted, others had to be buried, enclosed, or ritually handled. A place struck by lightning might become sacred or dangerous, set apart. Think of a tree split by lightning outside a city wall. Smoke rising from wet bark. People gathering at a distance. No one quite eager to touch it. A specialist called. He observes the direction, the mark, the timing. The event is not only weather. It has entered the civic world. It must be interpreted before ordinary life can smooth over it. This system gave the Etruscans a reputation that outlived their independence. To Roman writers, they were masters of omens, old and mysterious, perhaps excessive, perhaps wise, perhaps too bound to fate. Roman attitudes shifted between admiration and condescension. That is often how younger powers remember older teachers. They borrow the lesson, then make jokes about the teacher. But behind the Roman tone, we can glimpse an Etruscan vision of the world as a place of correspondence. Sky and earth mirrored each other. The liver and heaven could share divisions. The city and cosmos could be aligned. Human law, sacred boundary, political authority, and divine intention were braided together. Religion was not only comfort, it was a method for surviving uncertainty. Then we come to the deepest silence. The Etruscan language. We can see it. That is the strange part. We can read many of the letters. We can pronounce the words approximately. An inscription on stone, bronze, pottery, or a tomb wall is not meaningless marks. The alphabet is related to early Greek scripts, adapted by the Etruscans and later influencing the alphabets of Italy, including Latin. When you see familiar letter forms today, somewhere far back, Etruscan hands stand on the road that carried them. But reading letters is not the same as understanding a language. Etruscan does not belong to the great Indo-European family that includes Latin, Greek, Celtic, Germanic, and many modern European and South Asian languages. It stands apart, perhaps related to a tiny cluster of languages called Tyrrhenian, including the language of Lemnos, known from a limited inscription, and possibly an ancient Alpine language. That means scholars cannot lean on the usual broad family comparisons that help unlock many ancient tongues. There is no great library. Latin left histories, speeches, poems, laws, letters. Greek left epics, drama, philosophy, inscription, jokes, arguments, prayers. Etruscan left mostly short texts, tomb inscriptions, dedications, names, titles, formulaic phrase, labels on mirrors, votive offerings, a few longer texts, rare and precious, but still difficult. We can often identify a person's name, a family relationship, an offering, perhaps an office. We can see patterns. We can build grammar piece by piece. But the inner voice remains mostly behind a veil. That veil changes everything. When a language survives in full, a people can argue with us across time. They can complain, boast, worship, yoke, li, flirt, mourn, and explain themselves badly or beautifully. With Etruscan, we mostly get labels and formulas. This is the tomb of this person dedicated. This is sacred to. This man was son of. This title was held. Useful. Moving. But not enough to hear them thinking in full sentences. There are a few brighter openings. The gold tablets of Pyrgi, found near the sea at a sanctuary, carry inscriptions in Etruscan and Phoenician. They are not exact word-for-word copies, but they are close enough to give scholars anchors. The Phoenician text, being better understood, helps illuminate parts of the Etruscan. We see a ruler, Vifari Vilianus, making a dedication to a goddess associated with Astarte and a local divine figure. Politics, religion, and language all meet on thin sheets of gold by the sea. Imagine those tablets again. Gold not worn as jewelry, but written upon. Thin, bright, sacred. A ruler leaving words for a goddess, and by accident, for us. The sea nearby. The sanctuary quiet after offerings. The language still partly closed, but less dark here, because another tongue stands beside it like a lamp. The bronze liver of Piacenza gives another kind of help, with divine names arranged across sacred space. A long linen text, later reused as mummy wrapping in Egypt, preserves the longest known Etruscan writing. It seems to be ritual in nature, perhaps a calendar or liturgy, repetitive, formal, full of offerings and sacred timing. Its survival is almost absurdly unlikely. An Etruscan text travels somehow to Egypt, is cut up for a mummy, and later becomes one of the main witnesses to a lost Italian language. History does have a strange sense of humor, very dry, very old. Even with these witnesses, much remains uncertain. Scholars can read letters. They understand many names. They know some kinship terms. They identify titles like Zilath, probably a magistrate or official, though exact equivalents are debated. They recognize numbers in certain contexts. They see words, forgiving, dedicating, sacred action. But syntax, nuance, metaphor, mythic narrative, ordinary speech, all remain difficult. So the Etruscans are both visible and hidden. Their tombs show faces. Their mirrors show gods. Their roads and drains show planning. Their trade goods show reach. Their divination shows a disciplined imagination. Their alphabet sits in the ancestry of letters still used far beyond Italy. And yet, their own voice, the sound of a mother soothing a child, a priest teaching a student, a merchant joking at a harbor, a magistrate persuading a council, is mostly gone. That is erasure at its most intimate. A city can fall and still be excavated. A wall can break and still show its stones. A jewel can be buried and still shine. But when children stop learning a language, when books are not copied, when public life changes tongues, when conquerors translate what they want and ignore the rest, something living passes out of reach. Rome did not need to destroy every Etruscan word. Latin simply became more useful. Useful in courts. Useful in contracts. Useful in military life. Useful in citizenship. Useful in ambition. A family that wanted its sons to rise would use Latin. An inscription meant for public power would shift toward Latin. The old language might linger at home, in ritual, in memory, then grow thinner. A grandfather speaks Etruscan. A father speaks both. A child answers in Latin. That is how a world falls silent without a final scream. The fire beside us is low now, and above imagined Etruria. The night sky remains full of signs. A bird crosses an invisible sector. Lightning flickers far away. A priest bends over a bronze liver, tracing divine names with a careful finger. In a tomb nearby, letters name the dead. We can sound them, but not fully enter them. The Etruscans believed the universe spoke in signs. It is painfully fitting that they themselves became one of history's most stubborn signs. Visible. Beautiful. Partly readable. Never completely understood. And those unread letters lead us onward, toward Rome, the young neighbor that borrowed Etruscan symbols, priests, kingship, drainage, temples, and authority, even as it slowly became the force that would fold Etruria into its own expanding name. Rome enters the story first as a neighbor. Not the Rome of marble emperors, not the Rome of imperial roads running across continents, not the Rome that later writers would place at the center of the known world. Early Rome was smaller, rougher, younger, and very aware of the older powers around it. It sat in a useful place on the Tiber, close to salt routes, river crossings, Latin settlements, Etruscan cities, and the roads that move people from coast to inland hills. A hinge city. That is a good way to imagine it. To the north stood Etruria, wealthy, religiously famous, politically complex, full of cities that had already learned how to build, drain, trade, decorate, and command. To the south lay Latin communities and the Greek world of Campania. To the west lay the sea. To the east, uplands and inland peoples. Rome was not yet master of this web. It was one knot among others, but a knot in the right place. If you walked through early Rome in the 7th or 6th century before the Common Era, you would not see the clean stone city of later imagination. You would see hills, hida, sacred places, mud, smoke, rough paths, and low wet ground between the hills where water gathered stubbornly. The future forum was not born as a polished civic heart. It had to be made, drained, filled, organized, persuaded into becoming public space. That detail matters. Cities are not only founded by legends, they are founded by people moving water. Rome learned that lesson in a world where Etruscan expertise was close at hand. The later Roman tradition remembered Etruscan kings, Etruscan artisan, Etruscan religious specialists, and Etruscan symbols at the root of Roman public life. We cannot take every legend as literal fact. The stories were written down later, shaped by Roman pride and political need. But legends often gather around real memories. Under the polished surface, there is older clay. The last 3 kings in the Roman king list carry Etruscan associations. Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, Servius Tullius, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. The Tarquins. Their names sound almost like doorways between Rome and Etruria. The first Tarquin, in Roman memory, comes from Tarquini, an Etruscan city. His wife, Tanacule, is one of the most intriguing figures in the tradition. She reads omens. She recognizes signs. She sees greatness where others might see accident. In one story, an eagle takes her husband's cap, lifts it into the sky, then returns it to his head. Tanacule interprets this as a sign of royal destiny. Later, she sees another omen around Servius Tullius, a flame appearing near the sleeping child. And again, she understands that the gods have spoken. These stories may not preserve exact biography. They may preserve something else. The Roman sense that Etruscan power came wrapped in signs, ceremony, and sacred reading. Tanacule stands like a bridge between political ambition and divine interpretation. She is not only a wife in a royal tale. She is the voice saying, "The heavens have marked this." That is very Etruscan in feeling. Rome borrowed more than stories. Roman writers themselves traced major symbols of authority to Etruscan models. The purple-bordered toga worn by magistrates, the ivory curial chair, the lictors who walked before high officials, the fasces, bundles of rods with an X, carried as signs of command and punishment. These objects became so Roman that later memory almost forgets they had older roots. Picture the fasces in torchlight. Rods bound together. The axe blade quiet but visible. A symbol of power that is both practical and theatrical. Many rods together are harder to break than one. The axe says authority can cut. In Etruscan and then Roman hands, this object becomes a portable message. Make way. The magistrate carries command. The state has a body, and it is walking through the street. After the Roman monarchy fell, the symbols did not vanish. That is the strange part. Rome cast out kings, at least in its own story, but kept many of the garments of kingship. Consuls replaced kings, but lictors still walked. Fasces still appeared. Ritual authority remained. Etruscan forms were not erased at once. They were repurposed. That is how influence survives conquest and revolution. It changes costume and keeps moving. Religion followed the same path. Roman auguri, the watching of birds and divine signs, grew into a deeply Roman institution, but Roman writers acknowledged Etruscan expertise in divination. The Etruscan discipline remained a respected sacred science. Haruspices were called when prodigies troubled the city. Lightning, strange births, statues falling, temples struck by signs, these required experts. Rome could conquer Etruria and still ask Etruscan methods to explain what the gods meant. Honestly, that is one of the most haunting ironies in this whole story. Rome slowly silences the people, but keeps listening to their gods through borrowed procedures. Architecture also shows the older hand. The great temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill was remembered as a royal project from the end of the monarchy. Roman tradition, said Etruscan, artisans helped make it, and that a famous terracotta statue of Jupiter in a chariot was made by Vulca of Veii, an Etruscan sculptor. We cannot stand before the original statue now. It is gone. The temple burned and was rebuilt more than once. But archaeological remains and ancient descriptions point to a grand structure with features close to Etruscan temple forms. A deep front porch, a strong frontal orientation, rich terracotta decoration, gods above the city in colored clay. Think of the artisan shaping the divine face. Hands wet with clay, a tool smoothing an eyelid, a curl pressed into place. The workshop smells of earth, water, smoke, and heat. The statue is not yet sacred, not yet lifted high above Rome. It is still material under human fingers. Later, Romans will see Jupiter on the Capitoline as a symbol of their own destiny. But the hand that shaped the god may have come from an older Etruscan world. The drain beneath Rome carries another memory. The Clacca Maxima, the Great Drain, was linked by Roman tradition to the kings. Whether every detail is clear or not. The transformation of the Forum Valley required organized water management, and Etruscan techniques were part of the world from which Rome learned. Imagine that marshy low ground before it became the center of public life. Water standing between hills, mud sucking at feet, mosquitoes rising in warm air, then channels cut, stone set, water guided underground. The wet place becomes usable. A civic heart begins where swamp had been. That is not glamorous like a battle, but it may be more important. Before speeches, there must be ground to stand on. Before law, a place for people to gather. Before Rome can become Rome, someone must persuade water to leave. So early Rome looks less like a lonely miracle and more like an apprentice. It learned from neighbors. It borrowed symbols, rituals, building techniques, artistic forms, and perhaps even political habits. It took from Greeks, too, from Latins, Sabines, and others. But the Etruscan imprint is deep. Rome would later tell stories in which it overcame foreign kings and became free. Yet part of the freedom it celebrated still wore Etruscan clothing. Then the balance began to shift. Etruscan power had reached wide in earlier centuries. Northward, Etruscan cities and influence extended into the Po Valley. Southward, Etruscan presence reached into Campania, where they stood near Greek cities and other Italic peoples. Their ships moved across the Tyrrhenian Sea. Their elites filled tombs with imported goods. Their cities looked strong, but strength can thin when pressure comes from many directions. At sea, Greek rivals challenged Etruscan power. Cumae, the Greek city in Campania, became especially important. In the early 5th century before the Common Era, Etruscan maritime strength suffered serious setbacks, including conflict around Cumae. The details belong to a hard world of fleets, alliance, and rival trade routes. For sleep, we need not hear every clash loudly. It is enough to feel the tide turning. A sea once named for you begins to fill with rivals who do not fear you as they did. From the north, Celtic movements entered the Po Valley and placed pressure on Etruscan settlements there. The northern reach of Etruscan influence weakened. Trade routes shifted. Old balances became unstable. One city might face Greek pressure, another Celtic pressure, another local rivalry, another the rising ambition of Rome. No single storm destroyed Etruria. Many weather systems gathered, and Rome was changing. After the fall of its monarchy, Rome became a republic in its own telling. Though the early history is tangled with legend and later reconstruction, what matters for Etruria is that Rome grew more organized, more aggressive, and more patient. It fought neighbors. It made treaties. It absorbed territory. It learned how to turn victory into roads, colony, obligation, and law. Veii became the great frontier struggle. Veii was an Etruscan city close to Rome, too close for comfort. Across the Tiber and its surrounding territory, the rivalry lasted for generations. Fields, salt routes, prestige, security, and fear all lay between them. Veii was not a distant enemy. It was a near mirror, an older neighbor whose power reminded Rome that it was not yet alone in central Italy. Imagine Veii at dusk before its fall. The walls stand quiet. Smoke rises from houses. Outside, Roman camps settle into the landscape. Fires appear one by one. Soldiers speak in low voices. Inside the city, families listen to distant sounds and pretend not to count them. A child asks whether the walls will hold. An adult answers too quickly. Temples receive offerings. Priests look for signs. The ordinary evening work of a city continues because it must, even when danger has been living outside the gates for years. The fall of Veii in 396 before the Common Era became a turning point. Roman tradition later surrounded it with dramatic stories, including the general Camillus and secret tunnels beneath the city. Some details may be legendary, but the result was real. Veii fell. Its territory was taken. Rome gained land, wealth, and confidence. An Etruscan city that had once stood as a peer and rival became a possession. This is where the erasure becomes more than influence. The Roman method was not only to defeat, it was to incorporate. Land could be annexed, colonies planted, roads extended, treaties imposed, local elites managed, rewarded, or displaced. Some communities were given partial rights. Some kept local traditions for a while. Some saw Latin law and Roman military obligations enter slowly, like water through a crack. Rome did not always need to destroy a city completely. Sometimes it only needed to make Roman power the path through which every ambition had to pass. That is a colder kind of victory. A young aristocrat in an Etruscan city might realize that the future speaks Latin. A family might keep its tombs and ancestors, but send sons into Roman service. A magistrate might still honor local gods, but issue public business in forms Rome recognized. A craftsman might make old designs for new patrons. A priest might preserve ancient divination, but explain it to Roman officials. The city remains standing. The soul changes address. Not all at once. Never all at once. The fire lowers beside us. The image of Rome as apprentice fades into Rome as rival, then Rome as master. The old Etruscan cities still stand across the hills. Their tombs still wait outside the gates. Their harbors still smell of salt and pitch. Their priests still watch birds and lightning. But the horizon has changed. A younger city has learned the lessons of its teachers very well. And now, with roads, law, colony, patience, and hunger, Rome begins to fold those teachers into itself. One treaty, one defeat, one Latin inscription, and one remembered ritual at a time. After the wars, the ending became quieter. That is often how civilizations disappear. Not always under one burning sky. Not always with the last gate broken and the last song cut short. Sometimes they disappear in documents, marriages, taxes, school lessons, military service, new names on old streets, new laws spoken over old stones. The Etruscans were not erased in a single gesture. They were absorbed until much of the world they had made continued to exist, but no longer under their own voice. Rome was patient in this way. Victory on a battlefield was only the first movement. After victory came treaties. After treaties came obligations. After obligations came roads, colony, citizenship, land divisions, and public records. Rome learned how to turn defeated enemies into allies, allies into dependents, dependents into citizens, and citizens into Romans. It was not always gentle. It was often harsh. But it was effective, and perhaps that is why it changed history so deeply. Some Etruscan cities received partial privileges. Caere, for example, was remembered as having a form of Roman citizenship without the vote. That sounds dry, almost bureaucratic, but listen to what it means. A city keeps some status. Its people are drawn inside the Roman system. They are neither fully outside nor fully equal. Their legal identity begins to depend on Rome. A conquest becomes a category. Volsinii gives a darker image. The old city, wealthy and important, eventually faced Roman intervention, and after conflict, its population was relocated to a new site. The old sacred and political center was broken. Again, the details are shaped by Roman sources, and we should move carefully. But the emotional truth is sharp. To move a people from their high city to a new place is to interrupt memory. Streets no longer meet the same shrines. Ancestors lie elsewhere. The old view from the wall is taken away. A city is not only buildings. It is repetition. The path to the well. The road to the tomb. The turn toward the temple. the sound of a festival moving through familiar streets. Relocation cuts those threads. Yet even then, continuity remained. Etruscan families did not vanish overnight. Some elites entered Roman politics and society. Family names endured in altered forms. Crafts continued. Local cults survived under translated names. Tombs still received the dead. Artisans still shaped bronze and terracotta. Ritual experts still carried knowledge that Rome found valuable. An old culture can be conquered and still remain in gestures. Recipes, family pride, locale festivals, and the way a grandmother corrects a child. But the public language changed. Latin was the language of Roman law, army, administration, and ambition. It became useful in a way Etruscan no longer could be. A contract in Latin had power. A command in Latin moved soldiers. A political career required Roman forms. A young person born into an old Etruscan family could look at the world and understand that Latin opened doors. So the old language thinned. Imagine a house in an Etruscan city under Roman rule. An older man speaks Etruscan at the family table. His son answers in both languages, depending on who is listening. The grandson learns Latin letters for public life, Latin words for law, Latin names for power. The old tongue remains in certain prayers, certain names, certain jokes no one translates well. Then fewer jokes, fewer prayers, fewer children who understand when the old man speaks softly. No army needs to enter the room for a language to die. By the early empire, Etruscan identity had become something Rome could use selectively. Etruscans were remembered as experts in divination, as artisans, as luxurious nobles, as mysterious people from an earlier age. Roman writers wrote about them, but usually for Roman purposes. They became examples, warnings, sources of ritual, background figures in the story of Rome becoming itself. That is narrative erasure. Not forgetting completely. Something subtler. Keeping what is useful, trimming away what does not serve the new story, and placing the rest in a cabinet labeled ancient. Roman history made room for Etruscan kings because they helped explain the birth of the Republic. It made room for Etruscan diviners because Rome still needed omens interpreted. It made room for Etruscan luxury because moralists liked warning people about softness and excess. But it rarely made room for Etruscans as people speaking fully for themselves. The physical world followed. Old stones were reused. Temples were rebuilt, rededicated, or left to ruin. Tombs were opened by looters. Painted chambers collapsed. Sanctuaries disappeared under fields, towns, roads, or later buildings. The Funum Vultumnae, the sacred meeting place of Etruscan cities, remains debated even now. That uncertainty feels almost symbolic. The place where they gathered as a people is still not securely found. Picture an old temple block lifted from a fallen wall and placed into a Roman building. The stone does not protest. It holds weight again. A passerby may not know what it once supported. A god becomes masonry. A sacred inscription becomes a useful face in a new wall. History is full of such quiet indignities. And yet, the Etruscans were not fully erased. They returned through the ground. In the 18th and 19th centuries, collectors, antiquarians, and excavators opened tombs across Tuscany and Lazio. Some were careful by the standards of their time. Many were not. Objects poured into collections. Painted vases, many of them Greek in origin, but found in Etruscan tombs. Confused and delighted scholars. Sarcophagi emerged. Bronze mirrors. Jewelry. Terracotta figures. Inscriptions in a language that could be read aloud but not fully understood. Museums began to fill with Etruscan dead. There is a sadness in that, too. A tomb made for family memory becomes a display case. A sarcophagus made for intimacy becomes an object under a label. A necklace once placed near a body lies on velvet under glass. Yet without this rediscovery, much more would be lost. The museum hush is not the same as the tomb hush, but it can still teach reverence if we let it. Modern archaeology has changed the way we see them. It does not only chase gold. It studies farmsteads, workshops, harbors, drains, field systems, roads, ordinary houses, settlement patterns, soil, seeds, animal bonus, and broken pottery. Ground surveys and aerial photography trace lost roads and buried walls. Ground radar listens under fields. Excavations at ports and sanctuaries reveal networks of trade and ritual. Scholars compare inscriptions patiently. One name, one title, one formula at a time. The Etruscans are still difficult, but they are less silent than they once seemed. Their echoes remain inside Rome itself. The Roman triad of Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva has deep connections with the Etruscan Tinia, Uni, and Minra. The fasces, carried into Roman authority, had Etruscan roots. The curule chair and purple-bordered dress remembered older symbols. Divination, sacred space, and the reading of prodigies carried Etruscan discipline into Roman public life. Terracotta, temple decoration, drainage technique, urban ritual, and the alphabet all bear traces of Etruscan hands. Even the letters that move across modern screens have a long road behind them. Greek forms passed into Etruscan use, then into early Italic scripts, then Latin, then countless later alphabets. The words are not Etruscan now, but some of the shapes have walked through Etruscan fingers. That is a strange survival. A language dies, yet its writing helps carry other languages forward. So what does it mean to be erased? It does not always mean nothing remains. Sometimes it means everything remains in the wrong name. A Roman ceremony with Etruscan bones beneath it. A Latin letter with an Etruscan ancestor. A Roman drain remembering Etruscan watercraft. A temple form dressed in Roman theology. A story of Roman freedom built partly on the rejection of Etruscan kings. A conquered people's knowledge living on as the conqueror's tradition. That is not nothing. But it is not the same as being heard. The Etruscans still look at us from sarcophagi with quiet smiles. Their painted dancers still lift their feet in tombs under the hills. Their winged figures still wait near thresholds. Their gold still shines. Their bronze liver still divides the cosmos into sacred regions. Their inscriptions still name mothers, fathers, so daughters, magistrates, offerings, and the dead. We can approach them. We can admire them. We can learn from them. But we cannot fully ask them who they were and receive a complete answer. That is the final ache of their story. Rome did not simply replace Etruria. It consumed it, translated it, carried pieces of it forward, and covered the rest with Latin memory. The Etruscans became foundations beneath someone else's house. Strong, necessary, hidden. Return now to the hillside where we began. Night has settled over central Italy. Olive leaves stir in the soft wind. Below the soil, a painted tomb waits in cool darkness. The banquet is still there. The musicians hold their instruments. The dancers never tire. A bronze mirror catches no light, but keeps its engraved figures. A name sits on a wall in letters we can sound but not completely understand. Far away in the imagination, Rome glows with lamps, roads, arches, drains, courts, and temples. It believes itself eternal. Perhaps all empires do for a while. But beneath that confidence lies an older Italy, layered with forgotten languages and borrowed gods. The olive trees do not care about empires. The rivers keep moving toward the sea. And under the ground, in rooms painted for the dead, the Etruscans are not gone entirely. They are only quiet, waiting for anyone patient enough to listen through dust, stone, Latin, and time. Good night